The Property Show is offered to you by Thomas Oliver. Outstanding financial services. No confusions, just solutions.
The Property Show is produced by Irol Ivanu and presented by Karl Knipe, partner at the Kings Group Estate Agency.
Good evening and welcome to The Property Show. We've got a riveting show for you tonight. We're going to somehow try and sex up wills and inheritance tax. I know that's going to be difficult, but I've got the three guests here with me this evening who I know are going to do a fantastic job. Great to be with you. Can I just say straight away, if you've got any questions as the show goes on about wills or inheritance tax or anything around that area, please give us a text or WhatsApp us on 0737 661 1033. That's 0737 661 1033, or call the studio live on 0208 346 3345. That's 0208 346 3345. Or if your fingers want to do a little bit of typing, you can email us live at lgr.co.uk. That's live at lgr.co.uk. Either way, get in contact with us, ask us all those questions, or everything you're thinking about that you're not sure. Don't be shy, because trust me, if you're thinking about it, somebody else is out there. Do them a favour, if not yourself. So, good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Good evening. I've got with me this evening John Toth, expert in wills from Ashfords solicitors. Simon Todd, with us on the last show. In fact, he was so riveting, we've got him back again from Engage Tax. And Bobby Bhuiyan, senior consultant from Thomas Oliver, specialising in IHT, which is inheritance tax. Bobby, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, good. Well, welcome, gentlemen. Welcome. Lovely to have you all here. We're going to have a bit of fun tonight. Yeah. Right. So let's talk about Bobby then. First of all, Bobby's dedicated to his clients' financial affairs, protecting and enhancing their wealth, helping them to find solutions to their financial needs. Bobby specialises in giving tailor-made financial advice in 4 key areas: 1, tax-efficient investment planning; 2, lending services; 3, connecting people who need specialist advice; 4, protecting clients' assets with trust planning and life insurance. Seems like you've got plenty on there, Bob. Look after a wide range of clients, some examples: CEOs, senior executives, business owners, financiers, high-profile sports individuals, retired individuals. 2 quirky things about Bobby. Bobby's got the old hip action going on. He's a little bit of a salsa. Hey, Bobby, a bit of a salsa man, aren't you? Yeah?
I love salsa.
Yeah, with your wife?
No, she doesn't like salsa.
Oh, she doesn't? Somebody else's wife?
No, no.
Oh, right. Okay. And you're a bit OCD, Bobby, is that right?
A little bit, yeah. I like things in its place.
Oh, dear. We're going to struggle in here in this room tonight then. So, lovely to have you with us. Nice for you to be with us. Simon's chartered tax advisor with over 25 years in professional practice. He's worked in a number of London-based tax offices. Prior to founding Engage Tax in 2014, he was head of tax with the wealth management arm of a premier global wealth management firm. Simon has a thorough and detailed understanding of income and capital gains tax planning and structuring for UK residents, individuals, as well as those who are resident but non-domicile, which brings out many more interesting planning opportunities when it comes to inheritance tax. Is that correct?
That's a fair assessment.
Fair assessment. He's married with 5 kids, which drove him to running marathons most of the time during his 30s. He's now cycling because the knee's gone a bit, Simon.
Completely, yeah.
Yeah, I know the feeling. And also, you like a bit of lycra. Is that the other reason why you're cycling?
Well, it's comfortable to cycle.
Is it comfortable and not comfortable other times then? Is that what you're trying to say? Simon loves to travel, and this year he's visited Iceland and Thailand.
That's right.
Yeah, good. Which was you like best, Iceland or Thailand?
Thailand was beautiful.
It was, yeah, beautiful place. John, good evening to you. John's a solicitor with Ashfords. He's got over 30 years' experience in drafting wills and dealing with inheritance tax. John's married, and you live in Kent, John. So thank you for joining us this evening. Second love of his life is Surrey Cricket Club, who seem to have, I think, swept everything in their path this year, haven't they?
Great.
Even, I think, yesterday evening they won the Cricket Writers, took off most of those awards as well. I think there's another one on Thursday, so good old Surrey, well done. It's your sort of biggest love in your life after your wife, is that right?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, oh yes, we have to get that one in. You don't like broccoli, though?
No.
It's not your thing, no?
No, not at all.
So obviously you're struggling on your 5 a day there.
I am.
All right, okay. Yeah, and your favourite TV programme's The Great British Chef, which is quite ironic when you don't like broccoli. So
They don't all cook.
they don't all cook broccoli. Okay, well, welcome, gentlemen.
Thank
welcome.
you.
We're going to get straight into it, and we want to talk about wills. And the first thing is I just wanted to say a little bit about history of wills. So I was doing a bit of revision, swatting up, seeing what it is, and something that really struck out at me. About 500 years before Christ, Solon, who was a Greek Athenian statesman, lawmaker, and poet, he's credited with sort of being the first to put in power the modern will as we sort of see it now. He was one who recognised that not everybody just wanted to leave their wealth to their family. Actually, as they went through life, they had friendships, and they might maybe wanted to leave it to other people. And he was the first person who put something down to allow that to happen. So I think that's a really interesting fact, certainly for the community we're broadcasting to know that really, I suppose, the origin of wills in the modern day comes from Greece. There you go, a little bit of something I've told you, boys. So let's get straight onto it. So, John, why make a will?
Well, a will is important, I think, because it gives you control over how your assets are disposed of on your death. If you don't make a will, the government dictates who receives everything. So it's as simple as that. Plus that, I get paid for making wills, so there are
nothing to do with the last point, no?
No.
Yeah, and I suppose that we don't really want the government making the decisions for us.
For the majority of people, I'm sure it's fine. If you want your wife, your children to benefit, that's great. But if you're not married, if you have a particular child that you want to favour over another, then you've got to do a will, because the government will not do it for you.
Okay. What if you haven't got a will then? What if you die and you haven't got a will?
Then the government, as I said, there are intestacy rules, is what they're called.
Yeah.
That dictates how your estate is divided on your death, and it depends on whether you were married, whether you had children, if you had none of those, whether your parents are alive, if they're not alive, have you got brothers and sisters, and there's a whole regiment that's set out as to what happens to your property. But if you die without family, close family, cousins, anyone of that sort, it goes to the Queen.
Okay. Can't we just write a few lines then down on a sheet of paper? Is that does that not?
Yeah, you can, but you need to follow the formalities of a will, otherwise it's not a will. So they are that it should be witnessed by 2 people, and that it should deal with all your estate that you have to leave.
So when you say witnessed by 2 people, can they be anyone, or can they? What I mean by that, can they be relatives, or do they have to be not known to you?
You can choose anyone who isn't going to benefit from your will. A lot of people get caught out by asking the very people who are going to benefit from the will to be their witnesses. If they do that, it's a disaster, because the will is valid, but the people who are going to benefit are not allowed to benefit because they've witnessed the will.
Really?
It's one of those protections there to try and make sure that greedy relatives don't put a piece of paper in front of an old person, make them sign it, witness it themselves, and then the old person's left their property to the wrong people.
So Simon, have you got a will?
I do have a will, yes.
You do?
Yes.
A young man like you?
Well, I think with a young man with lots of children. So yes.
Yeah. And what about you, Bobby?
I actually don't have a will.
You don't?
No.
Oh, there we go. Another aspiring client for John there, I think.
Come on, Bobby.
A little bit. So, any particular? Why have you not got a will then, Bobby?
Well, I don't have any children. I got married 4 years ago. We just not got around to doing it, to be honest.
Right. I think that is
mortality.
Is that not what most people say, John? Certainly the people I chat to, it's sort of yeah, but they never do anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a million reasons why people don't make wills. The majority of them are they assume that everything's going to go to their wife and children.
Right.
And that may well be right, depending on what they have to leave. A lot of people don't like to think about death, and so it's something they put off and put off and put off, and in the end, it may be too late.
Right. Okay. So, can an executor receive a benefit under a will?
Yes, people worry about that. I mentioned witnesses cannot receive a benefit under a will, but your executors can. So you can choose family members to be your executors, and that's absolutely fine. And just to explain, the executor is the person you appoint in your will to carry out the wishes you've expressed.
Okay. So, and that can be anyone?
That can be anyone.
Okay. What about, can a husband and a wife then act as witnesses?
Yes, they can, provided, again, they're not benefiting from the will.
Okay, so for argument's sake, if a husband wasn't going to leave his wife anything and they'd agreed that,
yeah,
which would be a bit strange, probably, but I don't know.
To be frank, yes, that would be very strange, and I think there'll be a different conversation, because the wife is entitled to expect something from the will, even if the husband doesn't want to leave it to her. So where I was thinking of husband and wife is, if you have next door neighbours, husband and wife, and they come in and witness your signature, that's absolutely fine.
Right.
But I wouldn't ask your own spouse to witness your signature.
Okay. Yeah, just to say to listeners out there, as I say, if you've got any questions and you want to ask about, your situation with regards to a will, whether you've made one or not, if you've made one, are you now thinking maybe you've done something wrong? Again, please, as I say, text us in or WhatsApp us on 0737 661 1033 or call the studio on 0208 346 3345. It'd be lovely to hear from you. So, what's the intestacy rules? What does that mean? I don't really understand that, so explain that to me, John.
Well, I've just mentioned that earlier. So that's the rules that apply when you don't make a will.
Yeah.
And so it can, depending on what you leave when you die, if you've got children, for example, and you're married, then your wife will get £250,000 under the intestacy rules, if that's what you own. If you own more than that, then she gets half of it, and the children get the other half.
Right.
If you don't have children, but you're married, your wife will get everything.
Okay. So, well, it's good you've got that out there before we get the caller in who we had last time, so I'm sure he would want to... I can't remember his name, was it John?
Luke,
who called in and asked a pretty interesting question last time. So, a lot of our listeners, they've got assets, not just in this country, they've got assets abroad, primarily Cyprus or Greece. Are they going to have problems, or how should they go about dealing with it?
Firstly, they should make a will in Cyprus or Greece to deal with their property over there.
So, but will that cut across whatever the will is over here?
No, because as long as they tell their lawyer in this country that they've made a will in Greece or Cyprus, then the lawyer can accommodate the English will to that. But it's also fair to say the European Union have passed a regulation which says that where you have property in two countries, one of them being an EU country, then the EU country must accept that if you are, for example, United Kingdom based, and this is where your principal home is, that the United Kingdom law will apply to your property even in Cyprus or Greece.
Okay, so we all know what the $1 million question's now coming off this. What's going to happen in that situation after Brexit then?
Well, the truthful answer is nobody really knows, but we suspect, because at the moment the regulation applies that if I were American and had property in Greece, the American law would apply to my property in Greece. And I think France has had this with Johnny Halliday, who died in Los Angeles but had property in France, and the French are having to accept that Californian law is going to apply to his property in France. Okay. So the regulation applies to the EU country, so Greece and Cyprus will be subject to that regulation even if Britain has left the EU.
So if you have got a will abroad,
yeah,
Cyprus or Greece primarily, but Spain, wherever it is, with Brexit, you're going to need to definitely review that, aren't you?
You should do that regularly anyway with any will, I think, just to make sure it does what you want it to do.
Yeah. Because I can see problems there. Do you agree, guys?
Oh, I think so, for sure. There's going to be so many changes once we leave the European Union, and actually quite a number of European countries are already planning for those changes now, and we haven't even gone.
Yeah. I'm not sure we're doing the planning, are we? So I don't know. They tell us they are, but I think it's going to be one of those. The gentleman passed away, was it last week? Dennis Norden, who used to do It'll Be All Right on the night. I think we need to sort of. It's a shame he couldn't keep going for another 3 or 4 months. We probably need him on is it the 29th of March? It'll Be All Right on the night. He could have done a good show for that, I think, with his clipboard. It would have been ideal. So what's a gift with reservation then? Because that's something that people have asked me.
Yeah, that strays into inheritance tax. So we get this a lot. People think that if they give something away but then continue to enjoy it, for example, you give your children your house but continue living there, that they've got one over on the tax man and that they're able to die quite happily without paying inheritance tax on the house. And the tax man has the last laugh, because he says, if you've given something away but you actually haven't given it away because you're still enjoying it, living there, then they'll tax you as if it was still yours.
So how would the tax man know that, though, if you've written it down?
Good question. The answer is your family will have to make a declaration to HMRC on your death to pay inheritance tax. The penalties for misleading the taxman are, of course, prison, huge fines, doubling the amount of inheritance tax that you should have paid. So it's a pretty brave step to try and fool the taxman by denying that he carry on living there.
Yeah, something that you've got to be very, very careful with.
I mean, just on that, actually, what's interesting now is that all the government departments are working much closer together, and so it's not just HMRC that you'd have to be concerned about. They would have information coming through from land registry, coming through from council tax, local departments, seeing where people are registered to vote and things like that. So it's a coordinated information flow within the government that if they don't catch you one way, they'll probably find out a different way.
And I suppose that if you're not sure, then you need to take advice, don't you? Correct. Is that the way forward? When everyone dies, is probate something that everybody has to go through?
No.
Oh, right.
No.
Because I think did you know that, Bobby?
I wasn't aware of that.
No. So why do you have to go through probate, or why don't you?
You go through probate because you have either an inheritance tax amount to pay on your death, and therefore getting the probate is part of that process, or you have it because you have a particular asset. For example, if a house is in your sole name, then in order to transfer that to children or whoever is going to benefit, you need a grant of probate, so you can show the probate registry that you're the authorised person to deal with it.
Right. Okay, that's quite interesting. So I was just thought that everybody had to go through probate, or is that the lawyers? What should we say? Their little group.
Bonus.
Yeah, bonus. Yes, yeah. So a way of them getting some money.
No, there are many people who die who have insufficient assets to pay inheritance tax, and if they've joint accounts with their spouse or children, they just show the death certificate to the bank, and that's it. No need for a grant of probate.
I mean, last year there were only just under 25,000 total number of estates that were chargeable to inheritance tax. So it's actually paying inheritance tax is not as common as you might think.
It's not?
No.
Right. So how many again? Say that again.
25,000 estates.
Out of I suppose out of estates. So do we know how many people died last year? Not a particularly nice statistic that we're looking at on a Wednesday evening, but I think it's important.
I think it was about 700,000.
700,000. That amount. That's
but mind you, the tax that they paid last year was the most inheritance tax ever. At £5.2 billion.
Yeah. Something that you guys might or might not know. I've found this as a really interesting fact. I spent a little bit of time going backwards and forwards to Spain, but apparently there's more wealthy women in Spain. That's probably the reasons why I keep going backwards and forwards to Spain, actually. Mind you, I'm with my wife all the time, so it's not really doing me any good. Apparently there's more wealthy women in Spain than there is men, and I don't know if you know the reason for this, is that in the sort of late 19th century, early 20th century, when the male of the family would die, he would always leave his farm to his sons, so they could work that. That was deemed to be the most, what should we say, profitable part of his estate, and he'd leave that little bit of land overlooking the sea to his daughters, because it was worthless. And obviously now, in the last 50 years, that little bit of land in Marbella is now worth millions and millions of pounds. And it seems that if you look at the value of people's wealth, there's more women that are wealthier in Spain than there is men. So just a little bit of useless information, but I just found that absolutely unbelievable. I thought it was very, very interesting just how things can change over a period of time. Did you know that, guys? No? Well, there you go. You know it. You know it now. We're going to go to a break, and then we're going to come back, and then we're going to talk IHT.
Thomas Oliver, a representative of Openwork, prides itself on high-caliber quality service, with our senior advisor Vishal Gurajani at the forefront. Whether you're seeking advice on a mortgage, life insurance or a pension, we have the solutions for you. At Thomas Oliver, our financial advisors have a collective experience of over 100 years in the industry. We go above and beyond, trying to meet our clients' requirements in achieving their desired outcome in a friendly and efficient manner. Thomas Oliver is shortlisted for this year's Estas Awards as a mortgage advisor. Thomas Oliver with branch offices across North London, East London, Hertfordshire and Essex. For further information, please call 01707 872 000 or visit thomasoliveruk.co.uk. Thomas Oliver, outstanding financial services. Regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. You are listening to The Property Show, produced by Irola Banu and presented by Karl Knipe, partner at the King's Group Estate Agency.
Welcome back, everybody. Glad you've probably had a quick cup of tea there, or a little bit of a cafe, whatever takes your fancy. I think we've got a caller on the line straight away, so we'll go straight to that caller and then we'll carry on the second part of the show from there. Good evening.
Oh, good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Andreas from Southgate.
Oh, hello, Andreas. Thanks for calling in. How can we help you? How can the panel help you?
I found your program very informative, and I want to ask a question on probate and inheritance tax.
Yes.
If one spouse leaves everything to the other spouse,
Yep.
then is there a need to have a probate?
John, do you want to come back on that one?
Again, it depends on what assets the spouses have. If everything is jointly owned, the answer's no.
Yes, everything is jointly owned, bank accounts.
The property, the house is in joint names,
Yes.
then you probably won't need a grant of probate.
Oh, that's good. Good to know.
But even with whatever money it is, if it's 10 million?
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
If it's jointly owned,
Right.
then it will pass to the surviving spouse.
It's one of the main exemptions from inheritance tax
It
is transfer from one spouse to the surviving spouse on death.
Okay.
Is complete a zero tax event.
Is that helpful, Andreas?
Yes, it is, yeah. Thank you very
Does that
much.
put your mind at rest a little bit?
Yes, it would, yes.
Good.
At least you'd be only one probate.
Yes.
For the last spouse's part, yeah.
The last one, yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for calling, Andreas. It's really kind. Lovely speaking with you. Good evening. Guys, something I wanted to say that. So, thanks, Andreas, for that call. It was, again, great. I love talking to callers because they ask the questions that I know everybody else is sitting there thinking about. They just don't want to actually say, and the simple questions are the questions. Sometimes when we have these shows, you can actually get too bogged down with the technical side of things, and it's the simple questions that really are what we need to be getting out there to people. Funny enough, and you and I, John, were talking about this just before the show started, there's not a lot of information about wills out there that I could find that's relevant. I mean, I've came up with some stats from the BBC News, but they're 2 years old. It says 2/3 of the British adult population don't have a will, which again I think is absolutely frightening. I really think everyone should visit that. I mean, we've said this, but do you think everyone should have a will? I take it for obvious reasons.
No, not necessarily. As I say, it really depends on what you've got. If you've only got a few £1,000s in a bank account,
yeah,
you don't need to spend money on a will. No. But if you've got family and you want to make sure that certain things go to one member rather than to another, that's when you need to think about a will.
I think also as well that for everybody out there, and you don't necessarily need to go and see a solicitor or that's sort of what John's saying. If you go on the Citizens Advice website, there's some really good articles there. They'll certainly help you get a feeling for if you do need to get some further advice or whatever. But I do know a lot of our listeners do own more than one property out there, so they really need to make sure they're getting the right kind of advice and making the right kind of plans. So inheritance tax, Simon, talk to me.
Well, you can't start talking about inheritance tax with the standard quote that Benjamin Franklin said: there are only two things in life that are certain, death and taxes. And we're trying to cover both matters during this show. Inheritance tax, as it stands, is a relatively simple process. You have, when you die, your estate is considered, valued, and if your estate is subject to tax, then it'll be taxed at a standard rate of 40%.
That's painful.
Which is very painful in the first instance.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, in the last decade, despite the inheritance tax collection having substantially increased, and I think that's probably mainly due to the demographics and the increase in property prices,
yeah,
the government have actually introduced a number of changes to the tax law that's allowed families to pay less inheritance tax. And one of those changes was in 2007, which allowed a surviving spouse to collect their previous husband or wife's nil rate band. The nil rate band is the first £325,000 of estate that's tax-free from inheritance tax. If it's not used on the first death, the surviving spouse, when they pass away, their estate can use both the first spouse and the second spouse's nil rate band.
If they you say 100,000, they've got 225 to carry across, so to speak.
That's right. So therefore, you could, on the second death, you potentially could then have a in excess of £500,000 before anything else is considered of value of estate that's inheritance tax free, and that came into effect in October 2007. Then in 2012, the government are trying to encourage philanthropy, and one of the changes that they introduced was to encourage people to leave part of their estate to charity. And if they did that, they would allow a reduced inheritance tax rate. So if your estate, if you leave at least 10% of your net estate to charity, then that 40% rate itself reduces by 10% down to 36%. Another way of encouraging charitable processes and a way of reducing your estate. I think probably the biggest change that certainly is in the press in the last couple of years has been something called the residential nil rate band, and that's trying to give married couples who have a valuable property and want to pass that property down to their children, give them a bit of extra relief from inheritance tax, such that in the right circumstances, actually by 2020 you can have almost £1 million of total estate, which includes part of a primary residence, a house that you live in, will be IHT free on the second death.
Really?
So the revenue are giving, or the government are giving ways of people planning their affairs, looking at reducing their tax bill, despite the fact that overall it's actually going up.
Yeah, because I suppose in that. So if you've got a house that's worth 800,000 and a couple of 100,000 in the bank, that's what you're saying is that on the second death they wouldn't have to pay that any inheritance tax if it's a husband and wife.
Generally speaking, that's right. On the first
rough.
Death, everything goes to the surviving spouse, and then on the second death, everything's distributed then to the children, which is the most normal, common process.
But why do we think the government's done that, Bobby?
I think the government's done that because they want people to benefit directly from, how can I say, death. So if you've got, mum and dad have passed away, the children should benefit.
I think you've answered why the government are doing it. They want people to benefit from death, yeah. That's about the only thing they want you to benefit from. Go on, sorry to interrupt you there.
No, I think direct descendants should actually inherit these properties because the parents have worked hard to accumulate that wealth. And that's the main reason for it, because there was a big press scandal where these things were getting taxed, and there was a principal primary residence, and people are having to sell these homes. And that's the whole point. That only really works if it goes to your direct descendant. Has to be one of your children, really.
Well, for once, HMRC are giving something back.
Say again?
For once, HMRC are giving something back.
For once?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is that issue, there is problems there. So is there any other ways we can mitigate tax, Simon?
There
IHT
are.
tax?
Yeah, there are. And, I mean, inheritance tax used to be called a voluntary tax, so that if you plan your affairs, that you could reduce substantially or perhaps even completely exempt your estate from inheritance tax. That's not as easy as valuations go up and as longevity of life goes up as well. But there are certain reliefs that families can consider, and I think it's important to quote that term, families. There are certain reliefs that they should think about, and certain ideas about the future. The assets that you hold is important. If you hold the right assets, some of those are not chargeable to inheritance tax. And obviously, if your only asset is your house, then you probably don't have much flexibility. But if you're fortunate to have some wealth over and above your house, then there are opportunities through the right means and alternative investments other than cash, whereby after a couple of years of ownership, those assets are completely inheritance tax free.
So give us an example of that, Bob.
Thanks, Karl. So what you could do is you could invest into a vehicle that's an uncorporated business. So, for example, a business that's not listed on the stock market.
Right.
And the reason why the government done that is back in 1976, businesses were up and running, they were employing people, they were able to give benefits to society, and when those businesses effectively went into administration because the owners died, those businesses were subject to, obviously, a tax, and that meant the business could collapse. So the businesses were then subject to that liability. So the government said, look, we don't want to do that. We want to allow these businesses to continue and give benefit to society. So if you as an investor are able to invest into an uncorporated business, after 2 years it's completely IHT free.
Okay. We've had contact from our friend Luke. I don't know if it's Luke from last time. He said, should I get married or enter civil partnership for tax purposes?
Yes,
John.
Yes, always.
Yes, I think we covered that anyway, didn't we? But I think it's worth saying yes, definitely, always. What about trusts then? Should more people be looking at trusts, Simon?
Well, trusts have had a bit of a roller coaster and bad press in the last 10-15 years. But actually, although there may not necessarily substantial tax advantages with trusts, one of the main benefits that people consider trusts now is about control and about protecting what you've managed to build up and protecting it for a number of generations. And you may decide that putting an asset into a trust ultimately isn't just for tax purposes, but making sure it stays within the family for for decades and decades.
You're sort of saying so that the young 21-year-old doesn't go out and spend too much on Dom Perignon and on other stuff, and there's nothing left for his generation behind.
Correct, and the common example is actually marriage, right. And how your family's wealth can be dissipated through marriage, and then those being unsuccessful.
You mean through divorce? Yes. We got there. Yeah, it's not the marriage part that's the problem, is it? It's the divorce if it doesn't go well. Well, I mean, but don't trusts last for a long time? 100 years? Is it? Is there a standard time for trusts?
Yeah, they can last that long. 125 years is the maximum they can last for. Okay. But for most families, it's perhaps a generation. Right. 2 generations at the most.
So it just gives them that security for those couple of generations.
Yeah.
And then how does that work? You've got to pay tax on it at the end then, or?
Yeah, you pay tax. There's a 10-yearly charge on trusts, so every 10 years you have to pay inheritance tax, but it's a maximum 6%, so it's not...
So you're sort of staggering the payment then in that instance, aren't you?
Effectively.
Yeah.
That's right, you're not looking necessarily to mitigate your tax bill, you're trying to manage your family's wealth.
What about, Bobby, should people look at more life insurance? Because surely if you've got I don't know, would it be a whole of life policy or whatever, but I don't know. Let's say somebody falls down dead, they've got £1 million. Let's say they're very wealthy, they've got £1 million liability, IHT. Could they offset that with life insurance?
Yeah, I mean, you could write a whole of life policy that says, in the event that I die, it doesn't matter when I die, £1 million is written into trust, and that liability is then paid to HMRC to avoid your family having to pay it, which is ideal, really.
I know this is a real tricky question. Any idea what sort of £1 million of cover looks like for a 45, 50-year-old person?
It all depends, regarding demographics, age, where you're born, actually, where you live. In Glasgow, for example, it's a lot cheaper because people drink a lot, and the kilo we're at 60. Down here it'd be a lot more expensive. It just depends on the individual case.
Yeah. Is that true?
It's very true.
It is. If you lived in Glasgow, your life insurance policy is probably cheaper. It'd be more expensive, wouldn't it?
It's cheaper because it'd be more expensive in this case because you're more likely to die earlier.
There's too many of those cooked Mars bars. No,
too many cooked Mars bars. Yes.
You don't have many of those, are you? Looking trim, Bob.
Well, salsa dancing.
So, are we expecting any more legislation in this area, guys?
Well, there is a discussion as to whether inheritance tax should be simplified full stop. The rules that govern the application of the tax legislation to inheritance tax are complex, and there are so many different ways in of having to pay it and ways out of not having to pay it. There is a review through the tax simplification panel about whether it should just fundamentally be easier. I don't think that's going to come in the very near future. Obviously, politically, there are forever arguments about inheritance tax, depending on which side of the house you are, and so changes in government, if they're pending, may well have an impact on that.
Well, I just wanted to touch on this subject as well. What about equity release? How does that work from a tax perspective?
Well, as far as I understand, and I'm not a financial planner, equity release is simply borrowing on your on your property, which has no tax impact at all.
Well, it's actually better because if you've got an estate of £1 million and then you've got a debt on it, you've reduced the size of your estate.
So you could so let's say you've got a 1.5 million estate if you drop down dead today. And let's say you got a house that's worth £1 million. If you went and borrowed but you had no mortgage on it, if you did equity release for £500,000, it takes your estate down to £1 million.
Yes.
Etc. Etc. You could take the family on world cruise, do whatever you want with that money. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, the idea of doing this is because you've effectively ran out of money, or you've not saved the money in pensions or ISAs, and you've got the majority of your capital within the property, and what you need to do is obviously enjoy your life. And the idea is you go to a specialist and they'll allow you to take that money so you can enjoy it, but the problem is on your demise that property doesn't belong to you anymore technically.
Right.
Only a portion of it does, or to your family.
Yeah.
So potentially it could be forced into sale.
I suppose we've not seen that many. Yes, I was going to say that we've not seen that many of those end situations because equity release is something that's relatively modern. Is that fair to say?
It is quite a modern, how can I say, a structure, but there's plenty of people that have taken that sort of structure on because they might not have children, for example. They might not have issues, they were quite happy for them to allow. Well, they want to enjoy their lives, take the money out the property, have a good time, and on the demise, they've left it to whoever they think it should go to. And it might not be their children. Okay. They might not even have children.
Can I just add, Karl? Equity release tends to be for later life, so it's, I think, minimum 55 you have to be before you can take such a thing. And because it deals with later life, quite a lot of people have died now having equity release mortgages, so it is familiar. It's got better over the years, and I think they try to be fairer than they were originally. But the children need to know that their inheritance is going to be reduced by the equity release mortgage.
They need to be involved in that. I suppose that. What is it? So clients that with assets, should they be financially reviewing? I mean, how much money can you actually give away to
Well, this is the crux about what you think about your family, your future, and actually how much tax you want to pay. If you're willing to look at the remainder of your life and how much ownership of asset that you want to keep, then you can actually start to calculate how much inheritance tax your family will have to pay on your death. And giving away is the cheapest, the easiest, and has no limits whatsoever. It just has consequences. So giving cash to your children is
I do that every day. Well, I don't give it; they take it. There's a slight difference.
Giving meaningful sums of assets away, as long as you survive at least 3 years after the gift, then you'll immediately start to have a lower inheritance tax bill. As long as you live 7 years after the gift, then that value of that gift completely falls outside of your estate for inheritance tax.
What's the level of that gift, though?
There is no cap. There is no maximum and no minimum.
So you could give £1 million away to your family, and if you live for 7 years, there's no tax on that.
Correct. Yep. And it doesn't just have to be cash. You can also give assets if you're asset rich, cash poor.
Right.
The giving of assets themselves may have tax consequences. If you give a capital asset like a property to your children, that's a disposal for a different tax, capital gains tax, and that's something you'd have to calculate and consider what the tax cost of that is for you today, bearing in mind if you live 7 years, the total value of that estate, the total value of that asset falls outside of your estate, so you're 40% better off on the value of that asset.
But if you have got 3 or 4 properties, this is certainly then something that you should be considering and looking at. This is the reason why I suppose you need to tax plan, because there's so many, it's not just one size fits all.
That's right, and in a way, I mean, we're lucky that we've got financial planners, will writers and tax advisors around the table, because you need to speak to everybody to make sure what you're trying to achieve, you're achieving, and you understand, importantly, what the consequences of what you're doing are, both in terms of your financial position and your tax position.
What's another question? The impact of domicile on your family's IHT liabilities. How does that cut across?
So domicile is a almost unique British UK tax system term, and very simply, if you are what they call not domiciled, if you don't have a UK domicile, which means your father was not UK domiciled, that means they weren't habitually and permanently living in the UK, then you can claim to be a non-domicile. Also, if you were born abroad and you came to the UK, you can claim to be a non-domicile. The benefit of that is your non-UK assets are not subject to inheritance tax.
Okay.
There is an overriding factor, and this has been a part of plenty of anti-avoidance legislation over the years, that if you've lived in the UK, and this has just come into effect from April 2017, if you've lived in the UK for 15 tax years, then just that you were born abroad or your father was born abroad is now irrelevant for inheritance tax purposes. Once you've lived here for 15 years, you're now what they call deemed domicile for inheritance tax and subject to tax on your worldwide assets. But it is a planning opportunity, and something that certainly when you're looking at your family's estate and calculating your tax bill, you should be considering that for sure.
Well, that's certainly something that the listeners need to be aware of. I'm not sure how many of them would be aware of that. When did that come into again?
Well, it's been in existence for many years, but they've shortened the time from 17 of the last 20 years to 15 of the last 20 years, which just came in last year.
Okay, well that's certainly going to affect people, so that's something else that they need to be looking at, making sure that they've got all those areas covered. I think, what about limited companies? I mean, again, I touched on this in the last programme, but is that something that we should be looking at for tax planning, limited companies, in terms of setting up, putting properties into that?
there are opportunities for properties to be owned by limited companies. It's a very complex area. There are lots of different consequences, not just inheritance tax, and it's something you absolutely do need to get specialist advice upon. But if you plan your future, which is why they're called inheritance tax an optional tax, if you plan it, then you may be able to put yourself in a position to ultimately your family to inherit more by paying less tax.
The problem is people don't tend to. They keep saying they're going to plan, but they don't, do they, guys? This is the thing. You've got to make a diary. You've got to make a diary note or push yourself to start the ball rolling by contacting somebody to then just get a brief overview and a real reality check as to where you are. Because I think a lot of people, certainly in the southeast, certainly in the London area, don't really realise how wealthy they are in terms of numbers on a piece of paper. 6 numbers on a piece of paper. I remember when I was growing up, my dad used to think tell me if you're a millionaire, you'd made it. But obviously that's not the case these days, and don't get me wrong, you've done pretty well, but you can quite easily be 2-3 million paper asset millionaire but not actually feel like it. I know lots of people certainly the people I know that go in the pub that I go in, they definitely don't feel like it because they never put their hand in their pocket, so that goes without saying. That's probably why they are millionaires, come to think of it. But yeah, I think there is that more and more people just really need to get to grips with these things. I think again, if we look back to 2007, the average property price in the London area has gone up 50% since that time. Yeah. That's a lot. Average property price is 458, I think, down in London now. There's loads and loads of things. Is there one thing that we think, Bob? Is there one thing that you'd like to say to the listeners out there that they should be sort of, if you could tell them one thing to do, what would that be?
I think from my client bank at least, traditionally what they've said is to avoid inheritance tax. They're quite happy just to give property away, and that's a great way to do it. But when you give a property away and if you don't take the proper advice, the person or the recipient of that property could be subject to a huge tax liability if it's not planned properly. A 40% tax liability on your child on your death is a big bill to pay. Yeah,
the irony is you could have spent all your life building your wealth to leave your child, your family in a great position, and actually you could put them into a terrible position.
Correct.
Really, really bad financially. What about you, John? What would you like to say?
Apart from making a will, I actually agree with what Bobby's saying. Yeah. My experience is that what we haven't touched on is looking after ourselves in old age. And a lot of people are reluctant to pass assets on to their children because they fear they may need them to help them cover...
Financially.
Yeah, financially, when they are old and if they need nursing care.
I read an article, I don't know if it was a joke, I don't know whether it was on Facebook or on the web or whatever, but saying that a lady said that she was always on a cruise all the time because she said it was cheaper to be on the cruise than it was to be in a home. She could get on these cruises for 500 quid a week, but the homes were like 1,500 quid a week. And I was thinking to myself, yeah, that sounds pretty good to me. I'm quite looking forward to doing that as well. But I mean, it's not cheap, is it? No. Looking after yourself and getting that kind of. I know from my family, from the situations that I've had, it's not cheap. You're looking at £1,200 a week minimum, and that's adequate the way they're being looked after. But it's by no means anything spectacular. Mm-hmm. Simon,
probably the grand slam with my colleagues here. The sooner you do something about looking at your future, looking at what you'd like to achieve with your future and the wealth that you've created, then more likely there's more of that left.
Right, fantastic. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us this evening. I think, Simon, you said it earlier on, and I think you stole my thunder, but remember, there's only 2 things in life that's guaranteed. One, you're going to die, and the other, you're going to pay tax. Benjamin Franklin, yeah?
That's the one.
Yeah, well, I think that is... we virtually started on that point, and I think we can finish on it. Remember, you're going to have to pay tax and you're going to die. Thank you for being with us this evening. Hopefully you've got some good points out there. Thank you for Andreas ringing in. It was really lovely to speak to you. Great question there. Have a good evening, what's left of it. I'm going to nip home and try and see the mighty Spurs beat Barcelona this evening. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
The Property Show was brought to you by Thomas Oliver. Outstanding financial services. No confusions, just solutions.
Thomas Oliver, a representative of Openwork, prides itself on high-caliber quality service, with our senior advisor Vishal Gurajani at the forefront. Whether you're seeking advice on a mortgage, life insurance or a pension, we have the solutions for you. At Thomas Oliver, our financial advisors have a collective experience of over 100 years in the industry. We go above and beyond trying to meet our clients' requirements in achieving their desired outcome in a friendly and efficient manner. Thomas Oliver is shortlisted for this year's Estas Awards as a mortgage advisor. Thomas Oliver, with branch offices across North London, East London, Hertfordshire and Essex. For further information, please call 01707 872 000 or visit thomasoliveruk.co.uk. Thomas Oliver, outstanding financial services. Regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority.